Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nithya Caleb and I'm the editor of Food in Canada, Canada's only national food and beverage processing magazine. On behalf of CIFST and Food in Canada, I'd like to welcome all of you to our 2021 Table Talks webinar series, The Learning Trough, where we bring you regular webinars that explore the future of food. If you haven't already, please visit CIFST's website for a list of upcoming webinars, which will continue every second week until June and then run between September and November. If you are a member of CIFST, registration for the entire webinar series is free. Thank you to Dempsey Food for their generous sponsorship of our webinar series. Today's topic is pushing the potential of food entrepreneurs. Our speaker is Mike McNeil, Vice President, Accelerator and Kitchens Programs, District Ventures. Let's learn a bit about him. As District Ventures' first hire, Mike McNeil helped establish the Accelerator program before joining one of the accelerator companies, Purple Frog. Before returning to District Ventures, Mike was the Executive Director of the Alberta Small Brewers Association and served on the Canadian Craft Brewers Association board. Mike has substantial experience in connecting private and public partners to support Canadian entrepreneurs. Before joining District Ventures in 2015, Mike was an advisor to Canada's Finance Minister. More recently, he served on Calgary's task force for small businesses in response to COVID-19. Before we go into Mike's presentation, I'm going to ask him a few icebreaker questions. Mike, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, the first question is, what types of food have you been experimenting with in your kitchen?
Oh, good question. So I'll be spirit of full transparency. During COVID, I had my first child, and so I didn't really do much cooking. I tried to at the beginning, but then I was like, I can't do this. So I have been basically doing a tour of all the great restaurants in Calgary and supporting the hospitality sector. That's a sector that, as you mentioned in my bio, I have some experience with, and I love the entrepreneurs there. So I have been experiencing with some great Indian food, some Thai food, and the great thing is my baby is also trying that food for the first time. So he's gonna have a great palate by the time he grows up.
That's wonderful. Congratulations on your child.
Thank you.
So my next question was also related to food and ingredients, but I guess that's moot right now. So anyway, I'm going to ask you another question then. During the food tour, which one really strikes to you? Which one was stood out to you?
You know what? I really enjoyed Mexican food. So there's this really great restaurant in Calgary, if you ever get a chance to come out our way, with Salt and Pepper, which is a really great Mexican place. I've enjoyed their food probably more times than I should have during COVID. But you know, and I also really like Last Best Brewery. That's a fantastic local business. They have great food. My wife's vegetarian, so they have great vegetarian options as well. So feed the whole family there.
Thank you so much. I love Mexican food, so that's definitely going on my list when I'm visiting Calgary. Yes, thank you. Before I turn it over to Mike, I want to mention that if you have any questions, you can type them into the question box. I will moderate any questions at the end, and Mike will attempt to answer them before the end of the webinar. Without further ado, please welcome Mike McNeil.
Well, thank you very much, Nithya, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope everyone's enjoying their lunch. I assume most people are probably in the GTA or Ontario area. I'm obviously in Calgary, so this is more of like a second breakfast for me, or a brunch. But I really appreciate being here and telling you a little bit more about what we're doing to help support entrepreneurs, specifically in the food and beverage space, with our ecosystem that we've developed over the last 6 years. In terms of what we're going to cover today, I'll speak to the different components of the ecosystem, how it started and how it's going, how we've expanded the ecosystem over the last 6 years to support entrepreneurs in new and exciting ways, and then what the future of our ecosystem looks like down the line. And we made some exciting announcements this week, actually, which I'll speak to a little bit more. In terms of what I hope you get from the presentation, in addition to understanding a little bit better about what we do to support food entrepreneurs, I have developed some really great insights over the last 6 years of working with entrepreneurs from a variety of perspectives. Through District Ventures alone, we've worked with over 130 entrepreneurs, and at a variety of stages, at a variety of levels of success. And there are some common themes that have emerged that I think are not just great for insights into running a successful early stage business, but also I think just from a leadership perspective, some lessons that I think would translate in your work as in food science and technology. So I'm hopeful those will provide some real value to you. In addition, at the end, I'm happy to answer your questions. Anything about my own experience, what we're doing within our ecosystem, or any questions you have about the food industry from our perspective. So a little bit about me. The whole District Ventures story is really personal to me because I was actually the first employee of District Ventures back in 2015, and I knew nothing about food and beverage or entrepreneurship. My background actually started working as a political staffer on Parliament Hill. I graduated university. I was lucky enough to get a job with Jim Flaherty, who was my local member of parliament at the time, but also the finance minister, one of the best finance ministers. I'm biased, of course, but I think in Canada's history. If you recall back to a time before COVID, Jim was really instrumental in navigating Canada through the economic crisis that resulted back in 2009 and put Canada in a really great spot. But he did retire back in 2015 after some obviously really grueling work navigating the country through that period. And it was a period for me where I was really just, okay, like, what am I going to do? Because if you spend 3 years of really orbiting around such a big prominent public figure, you kind of forget about what the next 5 years is going to look like. That next 5-year plan is kind of out the window. And unfortunately for me, I mean, that feeling of kind of being a little lost was compounded with grief because Jim actually ultimately passed away just 3 weeks later after he left office and didn't really get to enjoy his retirement that he so deserved. So it was a time for me that I was really thinking, okay, what's next? And through that period, I was actually connected with a former colleague of mine who went on to work for one of the dragons on Dragon's Den, Arlene Dickinson. And I was super jealous of that colleague because I just imagined his day-to-day was like basically being on the set of Dragon's Den and like hearing a bunch of entrepreneurs tell their story and being around that excitement of building businesses and scaling businesses and investment. And so he had called me actually, said, you know, I'm out here in Calgary and Arlene's starting this idea for a food and beverage health and wellness accelerator. And she's just really looking for somebody to kind of do the work. And, you know, I never claimed to be super talented at anything, but doing the work was one thing I'm fairly good at. So he said, there's really one condition. If you want the job, Arlene will take a chance on you, but you really have to start this week. So we were talking, we had that conversation on a Monday, and I spoke to my wife the night of that and said, you know, here's this opportunity. Do you think we could do it? And she was fully supportive. And by Thursday, I was in that Best Western that you see there. I pretty much up and moved over a period of 3 days. And by Thursday, I was making calls to entrepreneurs to get them into our accelerator program, which we hadn't fully developed yet. So it was a really exciting time. And that kind of, I think, speaks to the speed of which Arlene works at, which is great for getting things done, not so great for moving across the country and kind of throwing your family upside down. But over the summer, we really put the program together. We talked to sponsors, we talked to the governments that were really supportive around this new vision for an ecosystem for consumer goods and food and beverage. And by October, we were off and running and we had launched into our program. But really what excited me about becoming part of District Ventures was the vision that Arlene had. I mean, it was something that was completely different than what we were doing at the time. Most accelerators and incubator programs, which are really just, you know, programs to support early stage entrepreneurs, are really focused around technology. And that was something that I think Canada was really starting to fall in love with, this concept of how do we do what they were doing in Silicon Valley and bring it up north. And particularly here where I'm based out of now in Calgary, that was really a conversation that the government was looking to have because the oil and gas sector had really declined. And finally, Alberta was having somewhat of a meaningful dialogue about changing their economic structure from a resource-based economy to perhaps moving more into economic diversification. And Arlene was really a driver behind that because instead of technology as being the only focus of innovation, Arlene really used her public profile to leverage that conversation into, okay, let's focus on everything that's in front of us. We eat and sleep, we need to take care of our health, we use products every day. So why don't we support the consumer product sector that by association with that has a material impact on the agricultural component that is so strong here in Alberta, but of course across Canada as well. So Arlene really became a champion of let's develop this ecosystem for food and beverage entrepreneurs that hadn't existed yet. Let's move the conversation around solely being behind technology as a means for innovation and job creation, and let's expand that focus and let's make it about food and beverage. And at the time, that was quite groundbreaking. And I think a lot of people were receptive to the notion that this was an underrepresented sector of Canada's economy when it came to supporting early stage innovation. And perhaps there was a window of actually expanding the impact of that sector if we supported entrepreneurs at the early stage of their development. So the accelerator program, which I was hired to lead, was really that first stage of supporting early stage entrepreneurs in the food and beverage and health and wellness sectors. Now, at that focus of the program was really just about finding products that had some traction, some sales. Perhaps they were selling through like some natural channels, some independent retailers. But they really wanted to get on the store shelves of Loblaws, Sobeys, Metro, some of those big box retailers and win. But to do that requires quite a few resources that weren't in the sector. And Arlene's thesis at the time was that was actually limiting growth in that sector because there was a real lack of access to capital, real lack of access to mentorship, and there really wasn't the bridge building between some of these large companies that of course benefit when these early stage companies succeed, but they weren't really investing the resources into ensuring that they could get through that initial stage of growth successfully. So our accelerator program has changed over the years considerably. I've been a part of it at the beginning, and as was mentioned in the introduction, I've come back more recently to help with the next phase of growth of our ecosystem. But when we started, I mean, we started with really just some early stage food and beverage and health and wellness products. And we tried to take that model from Silicon Valley of the typical accelerator program, which by that I mean an intensive experience of around typically 5 to 6 months of working with entrepreneurs to give them strategic connections to buyers, to capital, to mentorship, to really get them to think differently about their business from a growth perspective. And we really learned over the last, let's say, I think we're on our 11th cohort now. So we've been doing this for 6 years. We've really learned over the last few years about, it's really about the change in mindset that we want the entrepreneur to have by going through the accelerator program. So a food and beverage entrepreneur will go through the program, and typically they're seeing their business from a perspective of what's achievable right now with my current manufacturing processes, with my current run rate in terms of capital. What the accelerator program actually does, the first thing it actually does is that, what is your vision for growth? And then we work backwards from there. And when we work backwards from there, that's the actual nuts and bolts of execution. What kind of capital do they need to actually achieve that? How many stores do they need to achieve that level of revenue? And then what does the margin look like as they continue to scale their business? Can they reinvest into their business from a marketing and trade spend perspective? So that is really kind of the transformation that entrepreneurs go through the accelerator program. And we've got fantastic partners that provide support along the way. Our biggest partner is Sobeys. The entrepreneurs that go through our program are integrated into their buy local program, so they get some initial sales traction and they can prove their case with Sobeys to hopefully go national. And then we've got great support from a lot of the service providers that are there hand in hand. And the culture that we set with the accelerator is that they're there guiding the progress of the program and the entrepreneurs. And we go deep with the entrepreneurs that are in the accelerator program. We work on a weekly basis with their mentorship component, and then we have a structured curriculum that they go through. And the entrepreneurs that we think really benefit best from that intensive experience are entrepreneurs that have some sales that are around between 100,000 annually to around $2 million. At that spot, we're typically looking at them from a perspective of, is this an investable company as well? Is this something that, if they had a little bit more capital, could they grow that company past that level to being more of a $1 million to $10 million company? And that's the objective around the accelerator. The key benefits that the entrepreneurs receive, as I mentioned, is like really an intensive coaching experience. We have an executive in residence that the entrepreneurs work with on a weekly basis. And it's really about identifying, okay, what's their growth plan? Where do they want to be 5 years from now? And how do we work backwards from that? In addition to that, they're obviously looking for shelf space. And we've really created a lot of great partnerships to achieve that. I had mentioned our partnership with Sobeys, but it goes further than that. We actually have a physical Sunterra that, if you're in the Calgary area, is a really great local retailer, and it's a really great approachable retailer for a lot of these early brands to work with. And we actually have one of those markets actually in our facility here in Calgary. So half of my paycheck goes to Sunterra every day because I pretty much eat all my meals there. But that's also great because I get to try a lot of the brands that we're working with, and they have some shelf space that they can benefit from. We've had partnerships in the past with Circle K, which allows the convenience channels to open up for a lot of these entrepreneurs that otherwise wouldn't have that exposure. And then at the end of the program, what we're really trying to do is maximize the exposure for the entrepreneurs that go through this program. We do a structured demo day. That typically, before COVID, was a huge party that we hosted in Calgary where these entrepreneurs would pitch to a room full of retailers, distributors, investors, and then it would be kind of a real explosion of opportunities that they could explore after the program. But with COVID, we've actually amplified that. And last February, we had our first public-facing demo day where we live streamed the presentations. We had Canadian celebrities involved. We had representatives of all the top retailers, and then we actually sent out 50 product boxes to buyers, distributors, investors, so they could try the product, because in-store sampling right now and sending out samples in general is so challenging during COVID. So our program has pivoted so much during COVID, but I think the value is actually at its highest. And we've really had some successes over the last 6 years. We supported 90 companies through the accelerator program, and we've had some really great case studies. Chicopee Pasta, they were in our third cohort. They're an Ontario-based women-led business that was so impressive during their time with the cohort that we actually invested in them at the seed level, so at the very early stages of their business. And that company has grown across Canada. I'm sure you've seen their product in Loblaws, Metro, but it's also grown into the US. And as the company reaches these milestones, our venture capital fund has invested to support the further growth of the company. So that's a great example of how that's kind of come together and how we have really supported entrepreneurs from a capital perspective when they need it. Love Good Fats is another success story. Susie York has done a tremendous job with that company. They just announced that they've done over $100 million in revenue in just 3 years, which is tremendous growth. I see that product everywhere, and I'm tremendously proud that they've gone through our accelerator program. And then All Clean Natural is one of the businesses that probably more of a presence out here in Western Canada, but they are the exact example of what we're trying to do with our accelerator program. They're now doing over $60 million in annual revenue. They have over 100 employees. They have their own manufacturing facility here in Calgary, and they went through our accelerator program in cohort 2. And if you add that all up, it really makes a significant impact. We've done over $150 million in revenue in 2020 through our accelerator companies alone. And over 65% of them are women-led business, which is far above the industry standard. And that's something that's happened organically, which is fantastic. And it's traditionally, women-led businesses have been underrepresented when it comes to access to capital and supports. And our ecosystem is doing that organically, and which is, I think, fantastic. And it's happening because, you know, it's everyone's benefits when we support great entrepreneurs. One of the main learnings of the accelerator program really was, okay, we can provide that mentorship, we can provide those access to retailers and distributors, but really capital is what separates a brand from being a small brand to a big brand, especially in this sector where growth is so expensive. When you become $1 million company, the difference between being $1 million company to a $5 million company is quite significant when it comes to what are your manufacturing practices? Are you working with a co-packer? Are you going to need a team now to help you scale because you can't do everything anymore by yourself? And then are you going to need access to capital along the way as you reach those different check marks? So Arlene, again, set the vision of, okay, how do we bring in a new resource for the entrepreneurs in our ecosystem? And that really translated towards, let's get a $100 million fund to invest in the companies that not only go through our accelerator program, but also go through that phase of they need additional capital across Canada and US as well. And we need to provide that bridge for them to actually become success stories. So raising an investment fund, particularly unfortunately for a first time fund leader as well as a woman entrepreneur, is quite challenging. And for Arlene to do that as a $100 million investment fund and create that pathway to growth for a lot of these entrepreneurs is really an underrated Canadian business success story that I don't think gets enough attention, but it really is tremendous resource. I gave you the example of Chicopee Pasta. That's a company that is selling across Canada and the US, but only because it's had access to capital. to take on that level of growth. And without it, and it really proves Arlene's thesis with District Ventures, it wouldn't be the success story that it is today. And typically the investment fund and most VC funds are investing at what they call the Series A. So everybody kind of raises capital in different stages. There's the seed fund, which is your first time raising capital. And then you go to the Series A fund, which is more about going to the institutional investors and talking to VCs. But what's great about the District Ventures ecosystem is that the venture capital fund, because of its association with the accelerator program, is willing to take bets on some of these smaller companies that don't have the level of traction that typically VCs invest at. So you see some little logos here. These are companies that have gone through our accelerator program and have received a small investment to really help them get started, to really help them get that initial stage of growth underway, investing in inventory, investing in marketing, to really take on some of those larger retailers. And once they get some traction again and they go to fundraise again, the fund is still there for them. But that's really something that is a really great partnership between the accelerator and the fund, because we at the accelerator work so closely with these companies that we can then work with the fund hand in hand and say, hey, these entrepreneurs are really promising. We think they have some traction. We think they're a good fit from the fund. And it gives the entrepreneurs a real kind of supportive look of what it's like to work with an investment fund, which otherwise can be quite intimidating for a lot of entrepreneurs at this stage. In terms of criteria of what they look for, and really what you should be looking for if you're investing in a company, or perhaps you're going towards an investor to work with, is you should really have to have established growth plan. And that's what they're looking for through entrepreneurs that go through the accelerator program. But you really need to have that vision of what your company is right now, but what it could be a few years down the road. But that most important aspect of that is you need to actually tie that to some level of planning in terms of, okay, I want to do $1 million in revenue. What does that look like through the bricks and mortar channel? How many stores do I need to get into? How many sales do I need to make through those stores? And what does the product turn conversion rate look like? And then from a D2C, like e-commerce perspective, we need to understand, like, how does it really drive growth and drive traffic towards your website, and how much of that is converting to actual sales? There's still a level of traction. I mean, venture capitals funds do manage risk, and they need to know that there's obviously a consumer for the product. And then the team is so important as well. The entrepreneurs that we invest in is really a 5 to 7 year relationship that is quite in depth. And so we want to make sure that we're working well with entrepreneurs to understand, okay, what are the expectations of working with an investment fund, and what are the expectations in terms of reporting, telling us how the company's doing so that we can share that information with our investors as well. And then are they capable of scaling a company to a certain level of growth, which I can tell you from my own experience is quite challenging and requires a certain level of confidence and ability to kind of pivot and learn quickly. So more and more, I would say that the entrepreneur is becoming more of the critical component of the equation when we look at deal flow through the fund as well. Now, we had focused more on later stage companies in their development through the fund, and then obviously had more of a supportive ecosystem for entrepreneurs with a product that was established. But our focus has actually really expanded over the last 2 years to really focusing on that product development piece. So in 2019, we took over the operations of what was Food Starter previously, which was an incubator for early stage food and beverage entrepreneurs and a commercial kitchen for them to test and really scale their manufacturing in an approachable way. We took over operations after Food Starter ended, and we took over a physical facility in Toronto, a shared production space that provides low-cost manufacturing options for entrepreneurs to really just kind of grow their product in a sustainable way. They don't have to get their own manufacturing space right off the bat. They can actually scale their operations by renting our kitchens hourly and then going into their own more dedicated space in the kitchen, and then eventually graduating out into their own production facility when it becomes more cost effective to do that. We took that over in about 2019, and the facility obviously was, during COVID, we've had to manage a lot of the hourly rentals to make sure that everyone's safe and that we can use the facility in a social distancing manner. But we've also launched a lot of programs to support very early stage product development. We've launched a concept to market sprint, which is an 8-week program, which we match you with one of our product development experts who works with you over an 8-week period to really take your concept, your food and beverage product idea, and giving it the context and the resources to actually make that product. So everything from a regulatory perspective towards pricing, towards, okay, what is a retailer, what do their requirements look like? How can we prepare this product to actually get on the shelf? And at the 8-week program, we've developed a food and beverage incubator, which is available for entrepreneurs that go through the kitchen and manufacture out of our commercial kitchen, but also entrepreneurs that meet our criteria across Canada. And that criteria is really just an early stage food and beverage product and a growth mindset to grow that product over the next 2 to 3 years. And so in that program, you have access to all of our resources for food and beverage entrepreneurs. You have access to mentors. We do sessions with our partners, everything from just like your manufacturing processes towards what are the regulatory check marks that you need to have in place, your packaging, that component of really preparing you ideally for accelerator growth through our accelerator program and getting onto some of those larger retail channels and D2C channels in Canada. And then potentially, hopefully you're a fit for the fund at that point. So with the incubator and the concept to market, we've really kind of bridged the gap from, okay, product development to incubation, to scale with the accelerator program, to investment, and then, you know, expanding the product potentially through the US or other markets, and then hopefully, you know, from the fund's perspective, an acquisition or a going public or some sort of transition with the company so there's a return for investment. Our new programs are going to have a significant impact. We've seen with the accelerator program that if you work with a large amount of companies, the economic impact eventually really adds up. So by 2024, we're projecting that we'll work with 180 companies through our concept to market incubator program. 70% of those will be women-led businesses that receive support. And then from a projections standpoint, some of those companies will be very successful. Some of those companies will be obviously great companies as well. And then some will be probably smaller businesses, but the combined impact of that will be $48 million, which will have a really meaningful impact even further along down the past 2024 when those companies continue to grow and access our ecosystem that will support their growth past that stage as well. Now, we've had a more significant announcement this past week, and it's really Arlene's vision for how do we integrate all these pieces of the ecosystem that exist now into a really understandable way. So we really want to work with entrepreneurs from a variety of perspectives. I think that's pretty clear with the kitchen, the accelerator, and the investment fund. But we also want to make sure that all of the resources within our ecosystem are very congruent and are actually the sum is greater than the individual parts. So over the past week, we've really shown our vision for what that looks like. And that's really what Venture Park is. Venture Park is the name we're giving to this ecosystem that we all fit into. And there's 5 components to that ecosystem. I mentioned the capital fund. The kitchen and accelerator will now be transitioned under the parent banner of Venture Park Labs, because we're the component of this ecosystem, this Venture Park ecosystem that supports early stage entrepreneurs at the product exploration, the manufacturing level, and then obviously through the acceleration and growth mentorship piece. Arlene also has some marketing support. I mean, that's her bread and butter. She's been a marketer for over 35 years. And so the companies that we actually invest in through the fund also receive a team of growth experts that work with the entrepreneurs from a marketing perspective. So that's District Ventures Plus, and they are very much focused on, we've made an investment, now we want to make sure that the entrepreneurs have everything they need in terms of how to grow the product from a marketing perspective. And with consumer packaged goods, I mean, that is so critical towards projecting growth. Arlene's marketing firm, Venture Communications, which has been around for 35 years, is now transitioned to Venture Play. And the key change there is that we are going to exclusively focus on the food and beverage, health and wellness sectors through the clients that we bring on. So the expertise that we now have around the table with the fund, District Ventures Plus, Venture Park Labs, and my team, we're now obviously leveraging that with some of the clients that Venture Play works with, and we give them some insights from what we've learned with working with a lot of these early stage brands. And then the more recent acquisition, Venture Park Voice, which is formerly the Bullet newsletter, which Arlene acquired back in January, is going to be a really interactive content platform. So think of like a Huffington Post for entrepreneurs. It's going to give resources for entrepreneurs to be successful, in addition to helping tell the story of some of the entrepreneurs that we work with at Venture Park Labs or District Ventures Capital. It's going to tie all this together, and we'll be making some more announcements over that in the future, but it really is an opportunity to kind of tie all this together and then tell our story and the entrepreneurs that we work with, their story more effectively. So as I mentioned before, the kitchen and the accelerator, they aren't going anywhere, but they are going to go under the banner of Venture Park Labs moving forward. And there's going to be that nice cohesion of working with really early stage entrepreneurs from just the concept, the idea stage, towards scaling them all the way towards an investment and hopefully potentially continue to grow the company up to a point where it's making a really significant economic impact. So that's an overview of our ecosystem, but I wanted to take some insights from working with 130 entrepreneurs and then also working for an early stage company myself with Purple Frog, or what are some of the common themes and what are some of the lessons that I think that the viewers would really benefit from, not just applying if you're considering launching your own business, but also just in your day-to-day activities and your leadership positions and working with teams. These are things that I personally found to be true, and I have some examples to back them up. But in terms of real insights, I think the whole District Ventures story really is an example of how important the vision is. If you think back to Arlene, her vision was the reason that I got involved. It was her passion for doing something different. It was the reason I moved across the country in 3 days and took a huge risk in something that didn't have any revenue coming through to get that off the ground. And it's the reason why so many of these businesses to District Ventures Capital, District Ventures Plus have come online, because Arlene really didn't just start with the vision of the accelerator. It was the vision of an ecosystem. And the vision is the most important thing I think an entrepreneur and a leader can have, because everyone can be part of a vision. And if you have a concrete vision that you can actually work backwards from, it's much more impactful. It's not just a dream anymore. It's actually a roadmap to how to make something unique. So the vision is something that I've personally really tried to instill with the entrepreneurs that we work with, particularly entrepreneurs that come through the fund. We need to have clear alignment on what is the vision for the company, what is the vision for growth, how is that achievable, how can we work backwards towards achieving that, how can we break that up into, okay, if we want to become this level of company, what do we need to do this year, what do we need to do this quarter, and what do we need to do this week to achieve that? Everybody on the team needs to know what that is. Otherwise, you get confusion. And when you get confusion, and we've seen this, firsthand with a lot of the companies we work with, when we get confusion, people get nervous, your partners get nervous, your employees get nervous. The vision is the most important thing that the leader can instill in a company. And time again, it's the successful companies that we work with, it's the entrepreneur that sets that vision. And the second point is they find the right people to actually execute key components of that. Now, that's a kind of a cliche, and I don't want to say, hey, you got to hire the right people, because everybody, I think, knows that on some level. But it really is true. The entrepreneurs get to a level where they're good at certain things and they need support towards kind of filling in the gaps around that. But the most important thing is to never really think that, okay, well, I've hired this really great person because I've gone through this personally with Purple Frog, and I've hired this person, now they're going to solve all my problems. And it just never really turns out that way. The entrepreneur still has to play a critical role in setting that vision, and to that next point, keeping people accountable. So many times, like, being an entrepreneur is really hard, and you think that if I've secured this marketing firm, if I've secured Arlene as an investor, if I've secured a distributor, a national distributor, that's great. Like, that's going to solve my problem. The sales are going to come in. It just never happens that way. You've got to keep people accountable in a structure where if you've got a broker and they're a really great broker, you still need to engage with them I would recommend a weekly basis to say, here's what the vision is, here's what we need to achieve, where are you on that? Because that lack of communication, people are just competing all the time with other people's attention. You will lose it, and it's hard to get it back. So keep people accountable, hire the right people, but make sure they're supported, make sure you're tracking their progress. For a lot of early stage brands, I think the most powerful thing that people can do that I think is overlooked is actually hiring an advisory board. There are a lot of great people that you likely haven't even thought of in your network that are looking to support early stage entrepreneurs, and they have the certain skill sets. They may not have all the skill sets of running an early stage company, but they probably have a key component of it. And I really recommend establishing an advisory board early into the growth of the company. Once you've made that decision that you are serious about this, like, you don't want to waste anybody's time, obviously, but I think it's really impactful to keep some traction within the company, build in regular checkpoints, treat them almost like a board. without all of the governance structure that's required from having a board. But an advisory board also gives you an opportunity to say, when you approach a fund, when you approach an investor, look, I'm a really promising entrepreneur, but I'm also backed by some really accomplished people that are part of my team, and they can fill in some of the gaps and some of the doubts you might have around my business. The most important mindset, I think this is something I've learned in life, but really being an entrepreneur is no matter what happens, you'll handle it. There is so much stuff that can go wrong. And there is stuff that will eventually go wrong. It's not always a reflection of you. It's just a reflection of being an early stage company. And I used to have this mindset that there was a certain level of entrepreneurs where, if you're working with a really talented entrepreneur, everything's going to go well because they have that structure, they have that organization. No matter what level of entrepreneur, what level of experience, things are going to go sideways. But what really I think separates the entrepreneurs that really make it and push that company forward are the ones that just, no matter what happens, you'll handle it. It's a setback, they just keep pushing forward. It's that grit that I think separates entrepreneurs from the ones that, perhaps could have grown their company to a certain level, but it's the entrepreneur that, I don't want to say never gave up, because that's a cliche. And honestly, there's a lot of pressure on entrepreneurs to not give up and keep going. And I think that's not great from a mental health perspective, but to just continually reassure yourself that there is stuff that can happen, and no matter what happens, you will handle it. Now, the final kind of piece of wisdom, so to speak, that I want to share is really so much of how you come across, whether you're sending over a sales material or a pitch deck looking for an investment, or even how you present yourself at a trade show. I don't want to place too much pressure on this, but it's really important, because people are coming from a perspective of, they're looking for reasons not to take your product, or they're looking for reasons not to invest in your business. You really have to put the work into looking like you've done your homework. So how you do anything is how you do everything is a perspective I found to be really true. When entrepreneurs send us a pitch deck and there's 15 different fonts on it, there's that looks like they did the night before. They used just a template in PowerPoint. All that stuff seems trivial, and I wish it didn't impact, but 99% of the time, it always has some sort of indication of, is this a good person to work with? Are they going to be scatterbrained? Are they going to be somebody that's just we have to chase them down all the time for information? Are they going to delegate the responsibility of leading their company to us because they are moving around in 1,000 different directions? How you do anything is really how you do everything. That allows you still to make mistakes, because if you're a person that no matter what happens, you'll handle it, that gives us trust and obviously a clear insight that if there are things that come up, you'll handle it. But really, the best piece of advice I can give for early stage entrepreneurs, I do a lot of pitch coaching, and I do a lot of supporting entrepreneurs in how they communicate their narrative, is look like you've put 100% into things, because it will look like to us that you're going to put 100% into this. So I hope that's valuable, and I am pleased to take any questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mike. On behalf of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology and Food in Canada magazine, I would like to thank Mike for his informative presentation. Also, just a note, his presentation can be downloaded in both PDF and PowerPoint formats on the handout section. I'm just going to wait and I'm going to check if we have any questions from the audience, Mike.
Sounds great.
Let's give them a few seconds. I guess not then. Your presentation must have been absolutely clear.
Fantastic. That was the objective.
Just a reminder to everyone that we are hosting webinars every second Wednesday until June, and then from September to November. Our next webinar is on Monday, May the 26th, and will feature Dr. Charles Conte, PhD, Associate Professor and Director, Jeffrey Boggs, Associate Professor and Associate Director, and Amy LeMay, Research Fellow. All of them are from the Niagara Community Observatory at Brock University. Their presentation is on building competitive production systems in Ontario's agri-foods sector, accelerating the adoption of automation and robotics technology. Registration is now open on our website. Thank you for attending and enjoy the rest of the day.
Oh, cool. I think we actually have a couple questions there if we want to.
No.
I'm seeing, what are the main reasons for failure from your experience so far? Ooh, that's a tough one. Let's see here. I think one of the common things that we really see with entrepreneurs probably going through the accelerator program is like there's a really fine line between like being incredibly confident and like not being coachable to being entrepreneurs that are just like really kind of like, I'm scared to have this product in some way. Like it's a great idea, it's a great product, but they are like really, I think something's holding them back from taking that next step. And I think from our perspective is a lot of the entrepreneurs that like kind of don't make that next step, it's probably almost like kind of a limiting structure on, the next step is always like difficult from a risk perspective. As you go deeper into your business, you're going to need some level of capital. Either it comes from you, it comes from the bank, or it comes from an investor. All those are quite scary, I know personally. So I think the challenge is like what we try to do with the accelerator program is really like push them into thinking like they can be that larger business. They can be that entrepreneur that guides a business past that, from being a small business to being a larger business. So I think some of it is really just about a mindset shift. But beyond that, the vision piece is so important. I think a lot of businesses fail because they don't necessarily have a concrete plan. And I'm not a great believer in like you need to have a business plan for every aspect of your business because things will change. But you need to have a clear understanding of like where you are from a financial perspective. I really recommend that you work really closely with like some sort of finance professional that can actually help you give an insight in terms of cash flow, because cash flow is probably the number one killer of these types of businesses. Is that growth is very like the timing thing. You get a PO, you've got to obviously invest in making the product, you sell it, you can wait 30 days to get paid. And then you also are usually chasing around like a large distributor or a retailer to actually get paid. So like the cash flow structure is really challenging. And the way you manage the cash flow is like having a really clear understanding of where your business is at from a financial perspective. Once you have that timing in place, then you can really say, okay, I'm projecting 6 months from now, I'm going to run out of capital. I need to start doing an investment raise. And like from my perspective, raising around of capital can take from 6 months to 1 year. So you have to be in front of it. That makes sense.
Thanks, Mike. I wasn't able to see that question. Thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, you know what? I can lend a hand here because there's 2 other questions.
Yeah, I see them.
Oh, you see them? Okay, perfect.
Yes. So
Okay.
I will just read out the question and then
Sure.
you could take it from there. Can you dive into the pros and cons of using a Komen versus creating your own facility, community kitchen, versus creating your own facility in terms of startup food community companies? Obviously, the Komkin route seems easier, faster, because there's no capital required. But are there any long-term negative consequences?
At the beginning, I think it makes a lot of sense. It depends on where you're selling your product. If you're doing like farmers markets, or if you're selling into local retailers, I think it's a great way of, and you're doing your own production, like why not? Because it's like, it's not a significant investment, and ideally the sales are coming in. So you've got that sweet spot of like, you're making product and you're selling it fairly quickly. So you can get that early stage cash flow component set up. Where it gets challenging is our commercial kitchen is intentionally structured so that everyone pays for what they use. And so you pay an hourly rate. And if you are doing a ton of production, it actually becomes cheaper for you to have your own facility than paying for every hour of production at our facility. And it's intentionally done that way because our kitchen is meant to be a very supportive, but like we don't want entrepreneurs working out of there for 5 years, because that's not the vision. It's the vision is that they leave the kitchen, they open a space for somebody else, and then they get their own manufacturing facility and they continue to grow. There's also a regulatory component to all this. With the Safe Food for Canada's Act, our kitchen isn't HACCP certified because it's a co-working facility. So if you get into some of the larger retailers and start selling out of province, you're going to be required to be in a facility that is inspected for that and that has that certification. We don't, just because of the nature of our co-working space. It's meant to be at that certain level of company. But if you are looking to manufacture and get into like a Sobeys, and let's say you're in Ontario and you want to sell in Manitoba, you're going to need a different type of facility that meets that regulatory requirement.
Thank you, Mike. And the next question, do you get any government funding or is it all private investment?
We do at both programs. So at the accelerator and the kitchen, the accelerator is primarily focused on supporting entrepreneurs at a certain level. So I mentioned they have some sales. So we are aligned with different economic development objectives of different government departments. So at the federal level here in Alberta, we are partnered with Western Economic Diversification, and we receive some funding to facilitate the program from that perspective. And then through the kitchen, we are partnered with the City of Toronto that provides some financial support. And then we also recently signed an agreement with FedDev Southern Ontario to support the incubation and concept to market sprint programs that we provide.
Thank you. Another question is it unrealistic to hope for retail listings prior to having any small scale sales, like in farmers market and such things?
It's an interesting question. I mean, it's a little bit easier to go through the natural channels in the independent stores, and I definitely recommend that. I mean, sometimes you'll have a personal relationship with those stores, and those stores you can kind of like go in and sometimes talk to the owner. You're still going to need some level of like, I don't know if accreditation is the right word, but you're going to need to go through the process of like setting up a label through GS1, through actually like developing packaging, meeting some regulatory requirements to do that. But I think it's a really like approachable way of generating some cash in your business. I recommend doing that before you go to like, I want to get into Sobeys or Metro and Loblaws. One, they're going to want to see that you actually have some traction to the product. And two, that is expensive. Like, we didn't touch upon it too much, but there's listing fees, which are essentially like an incentive for a retailer to take your product. If you think of like a large store like Loblaws and Sobeys, they're essentially like leasing out real estate to you, right? Like you're selling on a shelf. And so that process can be expensive. Now, we do have strategic partnerships with Sobeys that through our accelerator program provide a little bit more of a leeway on listing fees, but it's something that is like really hard for entrepreneurs before they have some traction, some sales to afford. So I definitely think the natural channel is a way of kind of like learning a lot about your target customer, learning about how the product does, getting some sales in, and then, you know, kick it up to the larger retailers when you've had that experience.
Thank you, Mike. And the next question is, what leadership skills do you see most entrepreneurs needing as they learn to scale their business?
That's a good question. I mean, there's like 3 types of entrepreneurs that I think are like most consistent. There's the one that like is like, I'm gonna do this, I'm great, and like that's fantastic. And honestly, there's a lot of merit to that entrepreneur. If I think of like, I gave the example of All Clean Natural, Dan Boria, who's the founder of that, who is a good friend of mine. He really kind of personifies that, like, no matter what happens, I'll do it, because he has that real self-belief that he can achieve this and he can really make this company be a really successful company. And I've never doubted that the entire time I've known him, and I've known him for over like 5 years now, and never during the times that I've had discussions was there any doubt that he could do that in his mind. There's the next level entrepreneur that I think is like really systematic, and in terms of building processes and scaling entrepreneurs and scaling businesses as an entrepreneur from a real like set the vision, work backwards. That's kind of like what I think Arlene is really like. She's like very much like inspire people with the vision and then hold them accountable, but bring in people that have skill sets that you don't, that can now take the business to the next level. So the difference between her and Dan is that Dan is very hands-on. He's the one driving the bus from like a sales perspective. He's really material to the success of the business. And this perspective, you know, Arlene is really obviously critical to everything, but she gets the vision that gets everyone excited. And those are the entrepreneurs I personally love working with, because that's the way that I've grown businesses in the past. And that's, I think, a real effective way of like really building a strong team. And then there's entrepreneurs that I think just need a little support and a little confidence to take that next step, to transitioning from a small business owner towards like being the mindset of being a larger business. And we work with a lot of entrepreneurs from that perspective. I think that's probably the most common, but it's certainly not, you know, if you have that mindset, are you going to make it or not? It's not a determination of that. It's just, there's a level of personal growth with anything in running a business. And I think from that perspective, for that type of entrepreneur, they just need to become more comfortable in becoming the person guiding the business.
Thank you, Mike. And the next question is, what do you expect will be next for Venture Park?
Well, I think, you know, we kicked up a lot of like dust over the last week and telling the story of what we want to transition to and becoming like the ecosystem for consumer goods in Canada. If I know Arlene, it's going to be something amazing because she's just constantly thinking about how things can be better. From our perspective, you know, over the last year, we've at Venture Park Labs really transitioned towards making our programs reach Canadians in this new virtual way, and everybody's doing things virtually, and that's just kind of where we're at. But we wanted to redesign our programs so that they actually like have an impact. Instead of doing what we did before, but just on Skype, we're changing how we actually provide value. So we've developed an online portal for all of the entrepreneurs to go through our program that we're rolling out over the next 6 months, and we're using it right now to facilitate our accelerator program. I think providing that more digital community is the next stage for us, because one of the biggest benefits of going through our programs is actually the relationships you make with other entrepreneurs. Like, I don't keep in touch with everybody that's gone through our accelerator program. I wish I could. There's just so many that have gone through, but they keep in touch with each other. And so much of this industry is relationship based, that they can share information and knowledge that from a relationship of trust and the bonds that they build by going through the program together. So our hope is to have one gathering spot for them as well. But from a wider ecosystem perspective, I mentioned Venture Park Voice. That platform will be going live, I think, in the fall, which will, I think, really amplify everything that we're doing. So it's a great time to kind of stay tuned to what we're doing. I definitely encourage everyone to go to venturepark.ca and watch a really cool video that we put together that tells the story. And I think it's going to be transformational, and I'm so excited to be part of it.
Thank you, Mike. Please differentiate between incubator and accelerator.
Yeah, that's a great question. An accelerator, I mean, these are kind of terms we've taken from Silicon Valley that were for like technology, and we've kind of applied them to our programs. Traditionally, like an accelerator, if you think of Silicon Valley, is like they'll take an equity position in the company in exchange for giving all those resources. And then potentially they're usually tied with a VC fund that will also give like a percentage of like capital to help that business kind of get started. Now, the difference is like Silicon Valley is those are usually just like ideas at that stage. Our model is a little different because at the accelerator level, we work with entrepreneurs that have the product development. So from an accelerator lens that we view that term, we use it in, okay, this product already exists, but it has some traction, perhaps the natural channels as I talked about, but we see potential for it to be a large brand if it has these resources. So the accelerator program is really an intensive period of like introductions, thinking about how to scale the business, what do you need from a growth plan perspective, and do you need capital to do that? It's a really intensive where the entrepreneurs just like, I don't know how I can do all this in like 5 months. That's the experience we want them to have in accelerator. That's why we use the term accelerator. An incubator is for usually typically very early stage businesses that are really just about like going through all the components of setting up a company. In our ecosystem, because we're more product focused, it's more like, okay, we're going through the components of like developing the product, testing it, having conversations with retailers, getting their feedback, hopefully getting it to a stage now that when we go through the accelerator program, all the logistical stuff, all the regulatory aspect stuff, that's all sorted out. And the entrepreneur is really at that stage where they're like, okay, let's take that next step. That's probably the next evolution of our ecosystem. And that's why the District Ventures Kitchen component, I think, is so integral to everything, because for the accelerator program to be as effective as it can be, the incubator program has to really help the entrepreneurs go through that kind of murky early stage of, I want to build a product. Can you tell me how to do it? And can we work together to do that? And at the accelerator, it's like, you've got a product, now let's make it sell.
That makes sense. I have another question. Do you have
Sure.
a kitchen in Alberta, a commercial kitchen?
We don't. You know, when I was working with Arlene back in 2015, there was always kind of a vision to put one in the facility here. Thankfully, Sunterra moved in and took that space, and I eat lunch there every day, so it's worked out really well for me. But there is not a plan right now. I think like the commercial kitchen in Toronto, we still want to get that right. It's been a transition that because of COVID, and I don't think there was that like clear vision of how it fits in from how I just described into the accelerator until over the last year we've really developed that. So I want to get the kitchen right in Toronto before we think about expanding it, but I do think it plays a critical role. They're definitely not like we're a not-for-profit, we're structured as a not-for-profit organization. They're really expensive to run, and the way that they're run is to obviously provide some level of subsidized space for the entrepreneur. And so you need somebody subsidizing that, and that's typically the government. So it's not a model that's necessarily like, you know, always sustainable. You're always kind of chasing money to make sure that you can kind of bridge the gap between what the entrepreneur is paying and what we need to pay from an operational expenses. But I would like to get the kitchen right. And that's certainly, I think we've made a lot of progress over the last year on the kitchen, but before we expand, I'll take my own advice that we give to the entrepreneurs. Let's just make sure what we're doing right now is sustainable.
Thanks, Mike. That was the end of the questions.
Great.
Just going to give it a few seconds to see if somebody else wants, has any questions. Well, it looks we don't have any more questions. So once again, Mike, I would like to thank you for your presentation and for joining us today. And I want to thank all the audience, participants for attending the webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.